For over a century, the United States and Iran have been locked in one of the most volatile rivalries on Earth. An unbroken chain of oil deals and betrayals, coups and counter-coups, hostage crises and revolutions, proxy wars and nuclear brinkmanship. This is not just a clash of nations, it's a saga that has redrawn borders, toppled governments, and pushed the world to the edge of war. More than once. From the early 1900s, when foreign powers carved up Iran's oil wealth, to the 1979 revolution that shattered US-Iran ties, to the shadowy battlefields of Iraq and Syria, each chapter has only deepened the mistrust. And in January 2020, a single US drone strike nearly set the entire Middle East on fire. But the most dangerous years? They weren't in the past. They're happening right now, from 2020 to 2025, where every move could be the spark that ignites the next global crisis. At the dawn of the 20th century, Iran sat atop one of the greatest prizes in the modern world, oil. In 1908, the discovery of massive reserves transformed the country's fate overnight. But instead of prosperity, it brought foreign domination. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, backed by the British Empire, secured a deal so lopsided it bordered on theft. Britain pocketed 84% of the profits, while Iran, whose land and labour fueled the operation, was left with just 16%. When World War II erupted, Iran's strategic value skyrocketed. It wasn't just oil anymore, it was geography. In 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded under the pretext of securing supply lines and ousting suspected pro-German sentiment. The reigning Shah, Reza Shah Pahlavi, was forced to abdicate, replaced by his 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Overnight, Iran became a lifeline for the Allied war effort. The Persian Corridor was born, a supply route that funneled weapons, fuel, and food to the Soviet Union. US troops joined British and Soviet forces, turning Iran into a critical artery of the Lend-Lease program. At its peak, a staggering 1/3 of all US aid to the USSR flowed through Iranian soil. But beneath the wartime cooperation lay deep tensions. Iranians saw foreign troops not as liberators, but as occupiers. They watched as their oil wealth continued to be siphoned abroad, while promises of post-war sovereignty faded into the background. Seeds of resentment were being sown, seeds that would explode into one of the Cold War's first great confrontations. By the early 1950s, Iranian frustration over foreign control of its oil reached a boiling point. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a fiery nationalist, took a bold step in 1951. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. For the first time, Iran's oil would belong to Iranians. In London and Washington, this was seen not as self-determination, but as a dangerous precedent in the Cold War. In 1953, the CIA and Britain's MI6 launched Operation Ajax, a covert campaign of propaganda, bribes, and street violence. Mossadegh was overthrown, and the young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored to absolute authority. The message was clear: defy the West, and you'll pay the price. Over the next 2 decades, the Shah became one of Washington's closest allies in the Middle East. He embraced pro-US policies, maintained ties with Israel, and embarked on a rapid modernization drive known as the White Revolution. But progress came with a cost. His regime was backed by SAVAK, a notorious secret police force trained by the CIA and Mossad, which crushed dissent with imprisonment, torture, and executions. By the late 1970s, the gap between the palace elite and the struggling masses had become impossible to ignore. Economic inequality, political repression, and resentment toward Western influence reached a fever pitch. In 1979, massive protests engulfed the nation. The Shah fled into exile. And from Paris, a long-exiled cleric, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, returned to Tehran, greeted by millions. The Islamic Republic was born, the US was declared an enemy, and a wave of purges swept through the country, ending an era of Western dominance. The US-Iran relationship shattered completely in November 1979. Just months after the Islamic Revolution, Iranian students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran, seizing 52 American diplomats and citizens. For 444 days, the hostages were paraded on television, humiliated, and used as bargaining chips. President Jimmy Carter's desperate rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, ended in disaster when a sandstorm and mechanical failures caused a deadly crash in the Iranian desert. The humiliation cemented a permanent diplomatic rupture. In 1980, a new nightmare began. Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran, triggering one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. The US, eager to contain revolutionary Iran, tilted toward Iraq, providing intelligence, weapons, and diplomatic cover. 8 years of trench warfare, chemical attacks, and mass human wave assaults left an estimated 400,000 dead on both sides. During the conflict, Iran's growing network of proxy forces struck US targets abroad, most infamously in 1983, when Hezbollah bombed the US Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 Americans. By 1984, Washington officially labeled Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. The closing act of the war brought direct US-Iran combat. In April 1988, after Iranian mines damaged an American frigate, the US launched Operation Praying Mantis, sinking nearly half of Iran's navy in a single day. Just 2 months later, tragedy struck again. The USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 civilians aboard. By the end of the 1980s, decades of distrust had hardened into open hostility, one that no peace treaty could erase. The end of the Cold War did little to thaw US-Iran hostility. In 1995, President Bill Clinton imposed a full trade embargo on Iran, targeting its oil exports and investment. A year later, a devastating bombing at the Khobar Towers housing complex in Saudi Arabia killed 19 US servicemen. Washington blamed Hezbollah, backed by Iran's Revolutionary Guard, a charge Tehran denied, but which deepened the rift. In 2002, President George W. Bush escalated the rhetoric, placing Iran in the infamous axis of evil alongside Iraq and North Korea. Behind the scenes, US intelligence was tracking Iran's expanding nuclear program, which Tehran claimed was for peaceful energy production. Washington wasn't convinced. By the 2010s, crippling international sanctions were choking Iran's economy. Oil revenues plunged, inflation soared, and public unrest grew. Seeking relief, Iran entered negotiations with the United States and other world powers. The result was the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, a landmark nuclear deal under President Barack Obama. In exchange for strict limits on uranium enrichment and intrusive inspections, Iran received billions in sanctions relief. For a brief moment, it seemed like the decades-long standoff might finally cool. But the peace would not last. In 2018, the fragile hope sparked by the JCPOA was shattered. President Donald Trump abruptly withdrew the United States from the landmark nuclear deal, declaring it the worst agreement ever. He reinstated the harshest sanctions yet, targeting Iran's oil exports, banking, and shipping, strangling the country's economy. Tehran responded defiantly, accelerating its uranium enrichment beyond JCPOA limits and threatening to close the strategic Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil passes. The following year, tensions exploded in the Gulf. Tankers were mysteriously attacked, drones shot down, and vessels seized, each incident ratcheting up the risk of full-scale war. In December 2019, a rocket attack killed an American contractor at the K-1 base in Iraq. The US retaliated with airstrikes targeting Kataib Hezbollah militias backed by Iran, igniting violent protests. Angry militias stormed the US embassy in Baghdad, raising fears of a new regional conflagration. Then, on January 3, 2020, the conflict took a dramatic turn. A US drone strike killed Qasem Soleimani, the powerful Iranian general who led the elite Quds force. Soleimani was both revered in Iran and feared by Washington as the architect of Iran's regional influence. Just 5 days later, Iran launched missile strikes at US military bases in Iraq, inflicting damage but causing no American casualties. The same day, tragedy struck when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard accidentally shot down Ukrainian Flight 752, killing all 176 on board. The catastrophic error shook Iran internally and internationally, exposing the high cost of escalating tensions. At this moment, the world stood on a knife's edge, teetering between war and uneasy silence. As the dust settled after the dramatic events of early 2020, the United States and Iran found themselves locked in a cautious, uneasy dance. The Biden administration came into office pledging to repair the fractured US-Iran relationship, signaling willingness to return to the 2015 nuclear deal. But the path forward proved anything but smooth. Iran, meanwhile, did not ease its nuclear ambitions. Reports revealed a sharp increase in uranium enrichment levels, moving further beyond JCPOA limits. Alongside these nuclear advances, Tehran expanded its military budget significantly, bolstered oil exports despite sanctions, and intensified a brutal internal crackdown, including increased executions of political prisoners and dissidents, starkly contradicting any hopes for rapid reform. The New York Post and other outlets documented these hardening realities, underscoring the widening gap between rhetoric and action. Yet behind the scenes, faint flickers of dialogue persisted. In January 2024, secret indirect talks unfolded in Oman between US and Iranian delegations. The agenda was heavy: safeguarding Red Sea shipping lanes amid regional unrest and negotiating a ceasefire to ease the raging conflict in Gaza. Despite the high stakes, the negotiations ended with no concrete deal, reflecting deep mistrust and competing agendas. The discussions, reported by both AP News and social media like Reddit, showed that both sides remained open to dialogue, but far from reconciliation. Adding a twist to the geopolitical chessboard, Iran elected a new president in 2024. Pezeshkian, a reformist figure promising to improve foreign relations and ease tensions with the West. However, power in Iran remained firmly concentrated in the hands of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, whose influence over foreign and security policies largely superseded presidential authority. Analysts cautioned that Pezeshkian's election, while symbolically significant, would likely bring limited immediate change. Meanwhile, the international community's anxiety deepened with revelations of a covert trip by Iranian nuclear scientists to Russia, reportedly to exchange sensitive technology related to tritium production and nuclear diagnostics. These technologies are crucial for advancing Iran's nuclear program, particularly its capacity to enrich uranium and develop more sophisticated nuclear devices. The Financial Times highlighted that this secretive collaboration underscored Iran's determination to bypass Western restrictions and accelerate its nuclear capabilities. The combination of diplomatic overtures, internal repression, and clandestine technological advances painted a complex picture. Iran was engaged in a tightrope walk, balancing between engagement and defiance. The Biden administration, facing domestic political pressure and regional allies' concerns, struggled to devise a coherent policy capable of halting Iran's nuclear progress without triggering another regional conflict.